Welcome everybody. My name is Alberto. I come from the University of Twente in the Netherlands, and I'm here with Mina. And I'm super happy because we will give this workshop about humanitarian engineering in favelas together with Fabio and Simone. That actually we really thank you for the invitation, and we also thank the Misty Fund for this opportunity. Should be a kind of active workshop. We have a couple of activities that should engage you during the day. Let me go through first the agenda that we have today. So the first part will be given in the morning by me and Nina, and basically the second part in the afternoon, Fabio and Simone will give a presentation, and we will discuss about also a case, a practical case that you can work on in a couple of hours. So basically we will give first what is humanitarian engineering in the first place, so what type of field is humanitarian engineering. We'll give an example about humanitarian engineering in action from our perspective, because we work at the university, and what can you do in terms of research about humanitarian engineering. We have a small break. Not sure if we can, even though we are used to to work in the Netherlands, with everything has to be on the minute and on time, despite the last week in Schiphol and that everything was completely demolished, but give us a bit of flexibility in that sense. Then we have the serious game that Nina developed with one of our students about design for social justice, and it's something we can divide you in two groups. We have two game sets that we can play, but Nina will give more information about that. Then we have a small lunch, and then we start with the afternoon activities about basically a concrete example that Fabio and Simone are working in the favelas in Rio, and I think most of you probably, some of you at least, are already acquainted with that. There will be a presentation and a group's working session. Okay, and after that we would like to also have a sort of wrap up 1 hour when we can discuss a bit what you have done during the workshop in the afternoon, to discuss some possible output and also have feedback from you. One thing I have to mention before going on is that as you can see, probably there is a guy standing there with a big tool, and he's recording. He will record it all day for, let's say, advertisement purpose for the MIT. So we need to ask you if it's okay for you to be in the shooting, in the record. And for doing that, I need to ask you to sign this form that you can read. There is no money involved. There is no loan. But I think you have also the possibility to say no, and there is no problem at all. So if you don't want to be in any part of the shooting, that's no problem at all, right? I guess. But anyhow, yes or no? Sorry?
Yeah. Now, if you don't want to be part of it, we'll figure out how
to take you out. Yeah. So that's okay. I think this is also, we were just discussing before, that this is something that is all the time we have to ask to our students.
And this will go on the Institute YouTube channel more as a kind of highlights of IAP time. And obviously the focus is to show the activity, not you, and to show the different phases and different type of interaction and activity that we're going to do throughout today.
Okay, so this is agenda. I just want to make clear one part. Please ask question. Don't wait for us to go to the end. If you have something that is not clear, or you want to discuss a bit more, then just let us know. Okay, I think should be a more active session than unidirectional flow of information from our side. Good. Let me tell you a bit about humanitarian engineering in Twente. And first of all, what is exactly Twente? So Twente is a region in the Netherlands. I believe that you know where more or less the Netherlands is in Europe, right? It's a really small country if you compare to US, extremely small actually, if you compare also to Italy, I would say. We come from the University of Twente, that is one of the 3 technical universities that we have in the country. It's a really small country, but with really with many universities in that sense. There are 3 technical universities. The first one is in the west part of the country. It's called Delft. Maybe some of you heard about that. Someone in the, let's say, I would say south. This is called the Technical University of Eindhoven. And then we have the University of Twente. This is the eastern part of the Netherlands, in a city called Enschede, that is really close to the German border. Nina is German, by the way. So one of the, let's say, part that we are proud of is this the only campus that we have in the Netherlands, so to speak. So basically laboratory rooms, classroom, housing, and other stuff are in the same place. While in the other university, our downtown is more difficult to have this type of setting. Within the University of Twente, the group that I lead in humanitarian engineering sit in the Faculty of Engineering Technology in the Design, Production, and Management department. And basically our focus is on humanitarian engineering. Okay, the vision that we have when we have been asked to start this research group from the faculty is basically why we should have a group on humanitarian engineering in the first place, why it's important to do research in that field. So we would like to contribute towards creating equity and justice, basically. Let's say in the Netherlands, in Europe, and in the world, of course, our focus is toward underserved communities, and it goes without saying there are some places in the world that are more and some others with less, so to speak. But we also have a lot of projects in the Netherlands as well. As I said, the focus is underserved and marginalized communities. When I said underserved and marginalized communities, do you know what I mean with that? Can you picture something specific?
Informal settlements that are
for example, informal settlement might be one. Then, hello?
Low income.
For example, low income, yeah. Usually the income is one of the factors taken into account to characterize it. Basically, what we think about is community, they have limited access to some specific needs, okay? And then you can name education, the water, the food, sheltering, and so energy provision, and so on. So this is the focus of our research, more or less. How do we do it? Basically, using transdisciplinary action. That is, I think, a very common word lately. Transdisciplinary. We try to move in from multidisciplinary to transdisciplinary. So, what is the difference? Is that basically we try to include the community, and I think what also Fabio and Simone, they do in the Sensible City Lab, right? Working with the community. This is what made transdisciplinary the project. And what we would like to achieve is basically give a positive social and sustainable impact on our research towards that those communities. Okay, so the communities are not only, let's say, the playground. That is very important to realize when we're talking about humanitarian engineering. They are also active part of the project, right? While sometimes when you have a project with the industry, we have also students that work with the industry. Industry is more client. Okay, so you go there, you solve an issue, you solve a problem, you do some research, and that's it. While when you're talking about community and in humanitarian engineering, you need to understand that the community is way more than just a client. It's part of your research, right? Good. The focus area that we have in our group are basically humanitarian engineering design. So what we look for is to develop frugal technology, so low-tech technology for underserved communities. That goes in different directions, might be go in the manufacturing processes, might be on the energy provision. One of the research line for Nina that she will tell you a bit more in detail later on is design for social justice and equity. And then we have one specific part dedicated to education that is also quite relevant for communities where, let's say, you might have noticed that, of course, especially at the beginning, when there is a lot of let's say, support in the humanitarian aid, then education sometimes goes in the second level of orders, right? Why the education should be one of the center piece for that as well. What we have, we developed humanitarian engineer 5 years ago at the University of Twente. We developed on 3 different levels. We start first with the introduction of a master course, so postgraduate. This is, I think, is how you call it as well. We have our system divided in module. So one course is 5 European credits, so 5 credits, that's around 11 weeks. This course is not there anymore in the same version because we developed the full master program and we embedded the course. Then we had the minor. Nina is the coordinator for that. So for undergraduate students, they want to have a sort of first knowledge about humanitarian engineering, and then maybe they can come to the master program that we start in September as a full master program, so postgraduate program of 2 years, 120 EC. And it took some time, but we have now a good cohort of 20 students that start in September working only on that. So this is let's say, the involvement that our group and the university has on humanitarian engineering. Talking about stuff, my name is Alberto, as I said. I'm an associate professor and I lead the group. Nina is also with us. And then we have Nicola and Peter that are working in the group as well. And Nicola is the program coordinator of the master program, and Peter is the program director. We have 4 different specialties, and that's also why we decided to start the group in this way, to try to be complementary in that sense. We have some PhD projects that are running. Zikan Biani was also with us here actually last year, and she's doing the research with Nina. And then we have students that are working in different parts also of the world, in Kenya, in Jordan, and so on. Okay. Just a brief overview about what we do. We have, as I told you, we have projects in different fields. We have an example of one of the projects that we are running on about landmines. So if you're not aware, the small object that can explode for anti-personnel, for example, anti-tank. We have a project with in Lebanon about that. So how to remove in an efficient way these landmines. Not, I don't want to go into detail, but humanitarian demining is about giving the land back to the communities, right? While military demining is just to clear the path and to let them, the soldiers, go through. What we are trying to do, demining is really a difficult topic because you have to spot the landmines underground. And then it takes a lot of time. It's very dangerous, as you can imagine, and the technology for creating, unfortunately, landmine is also changing, because before was only made of metal, and in theory with a metal detector you can find them, you can spot them. A lot of false positive, yes, that slow down the process, but now the landmine has also 3D printed. So as you can imagine, spotting a 3D printed landmine with a metal detector become way more difficult. So we developed some system using a UAV and thermal camera to try to spot them underground between 2 and 10 centimeters depth, to see, working on basically the thermal signature of the objects in comparison with the land. The other box I will talk in later on. We have project with the WHO for the redesign part of the treatment tent that they have when there is an outbreak of a disease in different situation. And then we have some project also more, as I said, in the educational part, so developing a serious game, and you will gonna play one of them in 1 hour or so. So this is just to give an overview of the project that we are running at the moment. Yeah, the network, we have, of course, a network with many universities, many companies, and so on all over the world, including MIT, as you can imagine. And said that, I will give the word to Nina, because I gave a small introduction about what we do at the University of Twente, and she will give an introduction about the humanitarian engineering itself.
Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. Also from me, my name is Nina. I'm an assistant professor in the humanitarian engineering group at the University of Twente. I will talk a little bit more about what humanitarian engineering is, more from the literature perspective. Yeah, so what is humanitarian engineering? I mean, Alberto told already a lot about our projects, and maybe you have some experience yourself, I don't know. Do you have any ideas? No? For all of you, it's pretty new, the topic. Okay, well then it's good that we start with a short introduction. So according to Campbell and Wilson, it's the application of engineering skills for services within humanitarian aid or humanitarian action. That means, for example, after there's a crisis happening, could be war, could also be a disaster, such as an earthquake or flooding is happening, and how can we offer services, engineering services, in these kind of situations for disaster recovery. But it's not only disaster recovery, it's also for international development purposes, so also for more long-term and systemic issues. Another definition from Lucena, a more recent one, focuses what Alberto also already mentioned, a little bit more on the community. So we see also here coming back a model of engineering, development, and sustainability. So also our solutions should be sustainable. But here the focal point is really the focus on the community. So we work centrally with the community, and we develop solutions not only for them, but also with them. So they have a voice in the whole engineering process. Then a little bit more about the two sectors that we work in, so the humanitarian and the development sector. This is more a traditional view of the sectors. It has changed a little bit, and I will talk about especially the humanitarian sector a little bit more. But basically how it was for a long time was humanitarian aid was more short-term and was really focused on what happens after disaster. So there's an incident happening and we need to deploy some services. So for example, what you saw in the background, there's a flooding. How can we save lives? How can we retrieve the people from these situations where they are suffering? Whereas development system was more long-term focused, and there was, for example, more within really focused on low income and resource limited areas. So it could be, for example, very rural areas that also don't have a lot of, or where wasn't a lot of attention from the political side because they didn't have a lot of natural resources, but obviously leads then to not so many educational services and not so many job opportunities, and of course, more low income communities that are part of that area. So how can we help in developing that? Now, as I said, that was more a traditional view. It has changed a little bit. We don't call it development necessarily anymore, and also we are focusing more on the well-being of people rather than the economic development in a sense. A little bit more about humanitarian action, because that's what we focus on mainly. So it's really about saving lives. And important is that we always want to do that in a way that we uphold human dignity, right? So we don't want to compromise on that. For that, there's, for example, the SWARE handbook. The SWARE handbook is kind of the Bible of humanitarian actors. It's written by the Red Cross and other leading NGOs. And it basically gives us a set of humanitarian principles of minimum standard, because, as said, we also people in a crisis situation should have, we should preserve their dignity, uphold their dignity. They have rights as well, and often the local government or any local institution cannot really uphold that in a crisis situation. So we need to make sure that the NGOs operating in the field do that. But it doesn't only do that, it also helps us to improve the quality. So it's oftentimes used for training purposes for NGOs. And it's, of course, the accountability, what I just talked about. So what we have in the SWARE handbook is we have here the principles and the foundation. So that's based on the humanitarian charter, so the rights that people have in a crisis situation. Protection principles that we want to protect people. And the core humanitarian standard, and then also the focus areas that we have, in the areas basically where we deliver humanitarian aid. So the humanitarian principles, which are kind of the foundation of the SWARE handbook, are humanity. So basically it's about that we want to address suffering and reduce the suffering of the people wherever it's found. Then neutrality, so that we don't take any sides in a conflict situation, right? We serve everyone that, needs aid. Impartiality means that we don't prioritize people in need, but everybody who has a need, or at least the ones that have the most need, we serve first, but in general we serve everyone and we don't prioritize people. And independence, we are independent or should act independent from political or economic institutions. Do you think that's very easy to accomplish, all of that? No, I think especially all together it's very hard, and sometimes, of course, all four together also doesn't work. Sometimes you need to make trade-offs between certain principles. Like, for example, impartiality. It's also sometimes hard to spot where the need is, right? Like, how can we be sure this is the person with the most need? I think in a crisis situation, everyone would claim, I have the most need, because they experience it themselves as well. And also I found this very nice quote from Dante: the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in terms of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. So from an ethical standpoint, maybe it may also not be the optimal idea to stay neutral, but yeah. But anyway, so within the SWARE handbook, these are the core humanitarian principles that we adhere to, and we have 4 focus areas in the SWARE handbook, and that's WASH, so water access, sanitation, and hygiene, so any kind of services in that area. Food security, and nutrition for people in need. Then shelter and settlement, so everybody should have a roof over their head, but also settlement, so whole relocation of population groups, and health services. So that's mainly the focus areas that we have within humanitarian action. Now, we have a slight paradigm change within the humanitarian action field. We used to have a more classical perspective, which was really much based on this principled action, where we have worked mainly with the humanitarian stakeholders, so mainly international NGOs, whereas we see a shift towards more resilience humanitarianism, where we see it more as an open space with actors, especially local actors, being very much also acting in sort of delivering aid, delivering humanitarian assistance. That also led to us redefining what a humanitarian crisis is. So we used to be more the view that there is something happening, a disaster is happening, so we have to deliver aid. So it's reacting to an incident, and we see it more now towards working towards the crisis as the new normality. In a lot of places, we see that incidents, especially also due to climate change, are happening more and more. So if we rebuild this into our thinking and we adapt this crisis mode, then we can more easily react or anticipate. That also we redefine humanitarian needs a little bit. So needs are not only triggered by a crisis, but they are also offset against the capacities and the resilience that people already have. A lot of times local people already have a lot of capacity, they have a lot of knowledge, they know how to react in a disaster situation because it has maybe happened already 10 years before, or 5 years before, if you think about flooding or earthquakes. So we try to take that into account, that knowledge. And then also it meant redefining who is an aid provider and who is a recipient a little bit. Because the providers, as I said, we are having a more open space. So we also have a lot of local providers that help. So think about the local fire brigade, the hospitals, the maybe supermarkets or local logistical providers, that they can also really be an active stakeholder in the humanitarian field. And then also redefining the recipients, that they are also the first responders. They're not only the victims. Then I wanted to still give a quick introduction into social justice within humanitarian engineering, because we will also play the game later on, which is about social justice. What is it about? Well, here this is a definition about design justice that we work with from Constanza Chock. She basically says that it's about prioritizing design work that shifts advantages to those who are currently systematically disadvantaged. So a lot of times, or I also give an example, but a lot of times we see that marginalized communities, what Alberto talked about, or also underserved communities that lack fundamental resources or don't have access to certain resources, they are disadvantaged, and we want to shift the advantages more to them. So we design something with and for them. Now, can designs be intentionally unjust? What do you think? Can we have technologies or solutions, artifacts that are intentionally unjust? Yeah? Do you have any examples? Yeah?
In Montreal, in Canada, we have a street. Well, we have two neighborhoods close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
One is very rich and well off, and the other one is very poor. And the rich community decided that there won't be any like direct crosswalks between those two neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to get from one neighborhood to another. So spatially, they kind of created ways to keep them separate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good example. It's very similar to the one that I wanted to mention. I think it's also very well known. It's about, this is a road leading to Jones Beach, I think, in Long Island. This is from a, I think, relatively famous city planner or planner in the mid-20th century, Robert Moses. And he designed those overpasses. And they were intentionally designed relatively low so that buses couldn't pass through. And buses were mainly used by low-income communities, often also communities of color. And as a result, they couldn't enter the beach anymore, and the beach was exclusively used by the more richer community, the white rich community. Yeah, but there are many, many more examples of that. And of course, social justice or design for social justice is basically that we don't want to have these situations happening. So we want to design in such a way that we shift the advantages to the people that are excluded. That's another example which shows basically what social justice or designing for social justice is about. Of course, we see a lot of times the reality which is more like that, right? So the people that have already a lot of advantages get even more, and the ones that have none and get even less are excluded. If we talk about equality, then everybody would get the same support, and that would still lead to some being pretty much disadvantaged. If you talk about equity, then at least everybody gets the support that they want, so they end up at the same level. Justice would mean, or design for social justice would mean that we remove the barriers. All right, so that's an introduction to design for social justice, and we will talk more about it later during the game. Okay, I think this is for you.
That's back in my part. Thanks, Nina, for the small introduction about you. Yeah, oh, good.
Actually, just like before
Yeah.
you go.
Then I give it back to Nina.
No, actually, it's related to
Yeah.
the program.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what was the key driver for you to decide that you needed a program?
A master program.
Engineering. Is it like the first one, first of all, like ever made? And like, what are the gaps that made you develop this program? Because it sounds like you have a cohort of 20 students, which seems that there's a demand for it.
Yeah.
But for me, at least, it's a new concept that I haven't seen in traditional curriculums.
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question. Actually, it's one of the main questions that we also, when we as a faculty, we decide to try this road. The first question that we had to ask is that there is a need for this type of engineer, because when you set up a master program, it means that you are creating in the future, in 2 years, a specific profession. Okay, in Europe, this field of humanitarian engineering is not very common. I think is the only program in humanitarian engineering at the moment. There is another one in UK, I think in Warwick University, but is more in the management part. But believe it or not, the concept of humanitarian engineering is quite already well known in US and in Australia, where there are several programs in Texas, in Colorado School of Mine here in US, and in Australia in Sydney, I think, at I think it's Sydney. Oh, in Montreal, yeah. I think also even one in Canada. So we look at of course, when you try to come up with such a program, you have, I think, how the system works in Europe. You have been asked by the ministry to look at a business case as well, because when at the end, what these the engineers will do, well, they will find a job. So one of the first assignments that we had was to look for and to talk a lot of companies. Is this role, this figure of humanitarian engineer, something that the market and the community need? So the community was easy to address because there are a lot of fields where they can find basically a position. What the difficult part was more to see if the companies or the organization were happy to hire them. And actually, we took a while for us also to make a good business case, to have a lot of discussion with the industry, and then we found this niche. And well, we have the beginning. Of course, there are large organizations that want to have them, but for us, it was also important to see if they could find a job in the Netherlands, because then not all of them will decide to travel in Europe or around the world. We have a cohort of students that is mixed. So we have, of course, international students, but I think we have quite also some Dutch students. And I think it was important for us to see if there is a market. The driving force came from the students, actually, at the beginning. There was a lot of students that were doing assignment with us, at the undergraduate or postgraduate, a final thesis, and they were asking, okay, but it would be great if you could have already a postgraduate program, a master on that we can specialize in, instead of taking only the thesis, for example, from mechanical engineer or from industrial design or from social science.
And I think maybe coming back to the market, what we also saw is that the skills that the student develop is not only needed within the humanitarian field, because in the end, what they learn is about being socially conscious in designing engineering solutions and designing with limited resources, right? And that's also something that you can see with climate change and all those things being more and more relevant also in a Netherlands context. In Dutch context.
So the traditional, let's say, way of thinking about I would become an engineer, for example, or an architect, with a lot of resource around me, if I have to design a chair and produce a chair or a nuclear reactor, is kind of really changing. And more companies, also students, they need to focus on setting with really not many resources available. So that was hope we answered to your question.
Yeah.